Hi, everyone. It's Deborah Hamilton, Hamilton Law and Mediation, and of course, this wonderful MAAP community. I am so thrilled that you're all here. Tonight, we're going to talk about something really near and dear to my heart because I'm about to embark on a trip with my dog, but traveling with your pet, which some of you may be doing, some of you may not, but it is really an important investment in your time to figure out what it is that you need to bring along to make sure your pets are safe in the event you're traveling with your pets. So I'm traveling with Junie. As you know, Junie's my Irish setter, and I'm traveling with him to Florida from North Carolina. So what am I going to bring to make sure that Junie's safe? These are things you have to consider before you get on the road with your pet. So when I travel with my pet, I always like to put them in a crate, especially if I'm going on a highway. This ensures that if I stop short or if I'm, God forbid, involved in an accident, the dog has double, triple protection in the event something happens. This is really important because we don't know what's going to happen. Also, if I want to go get something to eat, I can leave the windows open, I can leave the car locked, or I can even leave the car running if I have a second set of keys. And if the dog's in a crate in the car, they're not going to be eating anything naughty in the car, or nobody can go in and take them out. It's really important for you to understand that keeping your dog safe while you're in your car, going to the bathroom or whatever is important. Also, what kind of paperwork will you bring? Well, you really want to bring at least their vaccination records so that if, God forbid, something happens, you have the vaccination records with you. Now, you can make a file in your phone, like I have, that has all of his records with pictures in my phone. So if I have to pull something up, it's right there in his file, marked Junie's medical records. It also includes his AKC, his microchip, and a recent picture of him. Because God forbid I lose him, I need a really new picture right before I leave almost of what Junie looks like. And that's a close-up as well as a full body picture. You want their head, you want their face. If they have an identifying characteristic, you want that to be easily viewed by anyone who might be looking for the pet. It really is something that most people don't talk about, don't think about, but you really want that in your car with you. You also want, of course, our little piece of paper that says, in the event of an emergency, call this person, that person, or the other person. And if you're traveling out of state, you should really have people who are within an hour drive of wherever you are. So on my drive to Florida, I have Debbie Boone, who's in South Carolina. Her number will be on my car. I have my friend Bonnie and I have my friend Mary in northern Florida. I have my friend Lindsay in Georgia. So there are several phone numbers on my little tag as I go to Florida for people who are closer to where I might be if something happens than my son in New York or my son in Florida. So you see, these are things you have to think about before you get on the road. So as we start off tonight, I just wanted to start with really setting up the discussion we're going to have. And I'm going to check in with everybody. I'm so glad to see that Susan is here and Connie's here. So Susan, I'm going to check in with you. How did everything go last week? I know that you were able, I think, to connect with Doug.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of how I can get Maggie down there. He's in Richmond. It's about an hour. It's about a 2-hour drive to get there. So not around the corner. And I have to try to figure out how to build it into my schedule of what else is going on in my life right now. And yeah, she has settled down quite a bit, just using instead of the spray, I'm doing the stream. And I'm trying to get him to do it consistently. That's the big problem.
Right.
And I have seen improvement. She still has but I think we're on the right track. You helped us get onto the right track.
Well, that's good. It's great to know, because that stream really makes a big difference. Spraying them with water as if you're combing their hair never works. If you squirt them between the eyes, it doesn't hurt anyone, just so you know, it does not hurt. It just really creates that possibility. There's also another person who will send you a link for, Billy Groom, who does different kinds of training. So I'll give you her name as well. She's a colleague of mine, but I will send that to you. Connie, how's everything going? We've missed you, and we've missed the other Irish dogs.
Oh, sorry. Things have been very hectic around here. And of course, we have had our weekly atmospheric rivers
Yes.
descending upon the state of California from the Pacific Ocean. We are right now between waves. It rained yet again last night into this morning. It quit long enough, fortunately, for me to go to a routine doctor's appointment. And now it's clouding up again and supposed to rain tonight into tomorrow. So we're a bit soggy, and as you can see, quite cool from the way I am dressed. Even though it's springtime here in LA, I'm still in winter clothes. So, but other than that, we are just fine. Thank you.
Well, I'm glad, because I was thinking about you with all the, what do they call it? The the river cyclones that were coming.
Atmospheric rivers.
Atmospheric rivers. And also, I was just talking to a colleague of mine in Sacramento, and she said that they've been pretty cold and rainy as well. So it's been pretty wet in California, which, okay, it's good because you have drought. However, having all in a week is a little much.
Right. We needed the rain horribly, but not all in one fell swoop.
And I see that pictures of colleagues of mine that LA and Sacramento are green, which is, springtime there. But I think this green might last into the summer at the very least, because of all the water you've had. So
yes, and they are talking about skiing up in the Sierras up until June or July.
Yeah, because they've got so much snow. They must have like an 80-inch base or something.
Oh, it's I think they have over 100 inches.
Or 80 foot. I meant 80-foot base.
Or 80 foot. Yeah.
Unbelievable. So Sally, so good to see you. I know the girls were home alone while you and Gordon traveled hither and yon to see family and to see colleagues. Glad to see you back. And the girls are good.
When I went to see the dog sitter, I was so impressed with how well Athena's skin was doing. And I asked her if she did anything differently. And she said, yeah, all those little horrible things. I always massage the spray from the vet in, and I just, with my fingernails, took them off. But actually, she looks just fabulous. And tomorrow is grooming day, much to their dismay. But the girls, they love the group. They love their dog sitter. They walk twice a day. And I asked her what she did differently, what times they went. She said, we were always walking at 6 a.m. and we generally walk a little bit later. And I said, well, she's a little bit, they don't walk so long on the second walk, but now they're walking long on the second walk too. So I've learned a lot from the dog sitter. So that's a good thing. And they're sound asleep now.
Yeah, well, I'd like to let everybody know that Sally advised me that the dogs walked 12,000 steps today. And I'm sitting there going, they're 12 and 13. Yeah. That's, huge, such a blessing that they can. But that goes along with how well, Sally gets them up and out and has caregivers who must be running the marathon with them as well, which is fabulous. The new background is because while I was away this weekend, we were actually in a town called New Haven, Missouri. I was at a family and Junie didn't go with me. And by the way, my nosy neighbor told me that Junie was barking while he was home. And she said, he never barks. And I go, yes, I know. So he barked when the caregiver went home to take care of her own dogs. And because he's a spoiled brat. So we'll have to talk with him and with her about maybe taking him with her in the car while he goes, or just letting my neighbor know that if he's barking for an hour or so while she's home, believe it or not, taking care of her own dogs, that he's just being a brat. but recognize it's good to know that you have the nosy neighbor who's going to tell you what's going on. And she said, I don't really want to sound like I'm, spying on you. I said, no, I need to know, because like Sally, we really want our neighbors to let us know. But so we were in New Haven, Missouri, and I know some of you might be in low ambient light areas. Well, New Haven, Missouri is a non-ambient light area. And so it was pitch black. And the place we were visiting had 8 different telescopes. And one of the telescopes was focused on the moon, and it was a crescent moon. And my son Drew took a picture that was fabulous, that you could see the Sea of Tranquility, you could see all the craters. It was just phenomenal. So again, when you're traveling, make sure that you have something that lights up your dog if you're in a non-ambient light area, because I think if any of my dogs had gotten out and gotten away from the circle of light that was the little, I guess it's a conference center, but it's a very small and campy conference center, we would have lost them in the dark. There, it was pitch black, let me tell you. So while you are traveling, I'd love to know what all of you do. I know, Sally, you travel with the girls, but not too often. I know, Connie, you travel often with the dogs, with Casey and Patsy. And I know, Susan, that you don't travel so much. Now, we've all talked before about, finding a caregiver to come in, or you were on my journey for finding a kennel last year. I'd love to know what you take with you when you're traveling, so that you know that the dogs will be safe. Again, we take their vaccination records, so we have it either on a picture on our phone or take a hard copy. We also take pictures of the dogs so that we know, God forbid they get lost. Leashes, water buckets, bowls, food, medications that they might be on. The MAAP plan cheat sheet, which talks about the people who you're going to call in case something happens. But what else do you guys do? Because I'd love to know any other little tricks or tidbits to assure that your dogs remain safe and happy. Connie, you use a crate, and I know, Susan, you use a seatbelt if you can, or a harness if you can. And I know, Sally, you use trampoline that makes sure they don't fall into the center. So Sally, I'll start with you. So what do you do when you're preparing to travel with the girls? Stop. You're being naughty.
Well, I've taken dogs internationally, and I go to the vet. And first, if you're going internationally, ask what they have to have, health records. If you're going to an island, a lot of times they have to be quarantined for a very, very long time period. So Guiding Eyes don't have conferences at places like England, or another island. But I have all the medical records and all the emergency contacts I have on one card. So that's really easy to find in the file. And then I have the list of the people and their medications. It's kind of different for each trip, close by or far away, and also having everything right on their crate or on their collar where you can find it immediately. You can't have to look for it. It's got to be right there where they can see it. God forbid something would happen.
That really is great advice, because, as I'm a proponent of all the time, let's make everything idiot proof. Like, they can't mistake what it is that it is, who they're supposed to call, where the dogs are supposed to go, because, that's a momentary snap decision, and things change given, what information you've provided and what information they provide for themselves based on their own experiences. Everybody does things in a way that creates the outcome that you want. So Connie, how about you? When you're traveling, I know the kids go in crates.
They always go in crates. On their collars, which are always on them, they have their LA County license tags. They have their little ID tags with their names, their call names, and my cell phone number on it. They also have their home again microchip ID tags on them with the microchip number, and of course that lets people know that they are chipped. I also am part of the AKC Reunite program, which has their numbers, although Mr. Casey has kind of chewed his tag from puppyhood, so I'm probably going to have to get another one. It does have baby tooth marks on it. And then they have crate tags on their crates. And, I take all the usual medical identification, and in Patsy's case, she is on meds. So I always have those meds with me with the prescription labels on them. And of course, the usual, food, water bowls, and everything that they may need. Most of the time, if I'm traveling with them, it's to dog shows. So I've got, 50 pounds of dog show equipment too, all the grooming equipment. And the basic stuff. The big thing I wanted to talk about tonight, because I knew that traveling with dogs would be the topic, is what do you do if, for instance, you have show dogs like I do, and you decide to give them to a handler? That's another whole kettle of fish, because not only does the handler need all their information, but there's the double worry of what happens if something happens to the handler. And there have been all kinds of god-awful, I know, Deb, you know this, god-awful RV accidents where, the handler's RV has gotten in an auto accident. There have been, of course, during the COVID epidemics, there have been instances where some of the big professional handlers going to some of the big national shows have come down with COVID. What happens if you can't get your dog back from your handler who's down with COVID? And then there's the whole issue of shipping dogs on airlines.
Yeah.
And my best friend has had dogs severely injured in turbulence, and even very well-known, supposedly reputable professional handlers, who show at the national level, did not take one of her dogs to the vet. He had a concussion, and he later had to be put down because of brain damage at a very young age. And he was injured going to the Orlando AKC National Championships. So at any rate, you have to be very, very, very careful when you're shipping your dog or leaving your dog with a handler, just because of all those instances. And believe me, I don't sleep. And I always travel with I go along to the shows if I do give the dog to a handler for a really big show. Most of the time I show myself, just because it's a lot less anxiety provoking for me to have my dogs with me and under my care and supervision than to give them to anybody else. So I will just caution, people who do use handlers, A, know them, B, document like mad, and C, be prepared for some kind of a god-awful emergency. And if you're shipping on an airline, it is 10 times worse.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because that was the next piece that I was going to bring up. I'll get to you in a minute, Susan. But since Connie opened the door, the ability of you to control who's taking care of your dog. So a lot of travel, dogs home with caregivers. Well, that's just as important if you send your dog out with a caregiver, either in a kennel or as a handler if your dog is going to a dog show. You need to do the same exact thing. You need to provide them with the medical records, and you need to provide them with the people who are going to be the caregivers if something were to happen to you, something were to happen to them. And if they don't want to take the trouble to take that information, put it in that bright yellow file, put a sticker on their dashboard saying, that Irish setter in the back seat or in the back of the truck, this is all the information for them. I have slowly but surely trained 10 or 15 handlers that they really do want to require their owners to provide them with this information. And that's because as an owner, we presume a lot. We presume they have a backup system. We presume they're going to take the dog to the vet if it's injured. We presume that they have things in place for the care of the pet, whether something happens to them or happens to a loved one of theirs and they can't be there. Let's not do that anymore. It's just better to be transparent, to be communicative and say, listen, Sally, you're going to take my dogs. I'd like you to know that what I'd like them to do. This is what I'd like you to do to make sure that if something happens to you, the dogs are cared for. And I'd like to know what you have in place. Because of course, when you give a dog to a handler, they're going to be hither and yon. And sometimes, unlike Connie, people don't go to the same dog shows their dogs go to. So you really have to rely on the handler, and you have to rely on the other people who are the breed people at the dog show. So if a handler gets hurt, injured, something happens to their truck, whatever, so many people will step up and say, I'll take your dog, I'll take your dog. Other handlers will take the dogs. If you're giving your dog to someone else to show, to care for, whatever, you need to know. And I know Susan knows this because it was what I asked her to do with the woman who was going to train Maggie. You just need to know what her plans are if something were to happen to her or to Maggie. You need to know what's going to happen to your pet that's traveling with the handler. What do they have in place? And I will tell you that except for the 10 people that I've worked with and built their program, most handlers are by the seat of their pants. Well, I know that the other handlers will take my dogs. Well, that's great. But I might not want my dog going with that handler or the other handler. I might want to have the dog go home with a colleague of mine who's at the dog show so that I get him out of the handler's truck. And then there's the question of whether or not, the handler has the ability to have the dog cared for by a veterinarian if they don't own it. So you have to make sure you put that along with the agreement. People who take dogs to train dogs, take dogs to show dogs, really need to have a contract that doesn't just talk about how much I'm going to pay you and how long I'm going to hold it. It really needs to say, how much am I going to pay you? How long am I going to hold the dog? What's the period together? What is our agreement with respect to payment? What's our agreement with respect to outcomes? Also, what's our agreement with respect to what happens to the dog at night? Where does it sleep? Where does it go? If something happens to you, where does it go? These are all things people don't think of because you're just sort of so grateful that Joe Smith is the handler, top handler, taking your dog out. Great. And you're a little afraid to ask Joe what it is that, he has in place to care for your dog in the case of an emergency. And as Susan found out, if you dare to ask Joe Smith what the plans are, they say, well, I won't take your dog anymore because, they perceive you as a pain in the ass. And you know what, I'm okay with that because I really do want to have a working relationship with any dog caregiver I have, any dog trainer I have, any dog handler, that they have something in place. It makes sense. I mean, this is your business. It makes sense to have something in place. So if you're traveling with your dog or a handler's traveling with your dog, or your dog is traveling somewhere or staying with someone, asking those questions is so important. I know there is, it's so funny. He's like having such a gay old time here eating pistachio nut seeds. I mean, the shell. He'll probably die from eating pistachio nut shells, but I'm doing this, and so he's on his own. He's so funny. Susan, I'd love to ask you, because I know that this was a concern of yours when you were going to have the trainer take your dog. So that's like a handler. And when you asked the questions, you got incredible pushback.
Yeah, I sure did. And actually, I'm glad we went through that process, though, of questioning her, because I didn't realize, I had some anxiety about leaving Maggie with her because she had 3 young children, and they're going to be her priority over the dog. And did she really have time to dedicate to working with Maggie? And, would Maggie be safe in her care? And
would be safe in her care? Because, at the end of the day, can't articulate the time spent with the dog, the milestones that you're supposed to reach in a week, in 10 days, in 14 days, if it's a 2-week stay. What are the milestones that you're going to meet and how she's going to meet it and how much time?
Yeah,
It really is something that, when I spoke to my handler, when he took Junie out, I said, I'd like to give him to you for 3 months. This is all his information. This is all my information. I want all of your information. And of course, he went nuts because, and I love him, but he goes, this is just so time consuming. And I said, I know, but do you want to show him or not? And we have a relationship. So, he put up with it. But I'm telling you, like Susan, people will just say, you're too much of a pain in the hiney and I'm not going to do it. And if that's the case, take a step back, take a breath and say, tell me a little bit more about what's troubling you about my questions. That's what Susan did. And she didn't answer the trainer, but I know that Susan learned a great deal from that interaction. And when she's going to work with someone else, she's going to ask those same questions and really in a way that's curious, as opposed to, this is what I want and this is what you're going to do. No, I'd like to know what you have in place. Let me know and let's see how we can work together. That's what's the most important.
Let me just add something too. Speaking of contracts, I had a very unpleasant situation with a very supposedly well-respected professional handler. I was showing, speaking of Bammy at the outside, who of course is an angel now.
Yes.
When I was first showing Bammy in Sacramento, when she was still young and in the classes, I had this very well-known professional handler come over to my setup after judging and ask if she could take her on the road. And so at that point, even though I was not nearly the experienced handler that I am now, I was still freshly retired from aerospace and very up on contracting, being a program manager. So more contracting than I ever wanted for 10 lifetimes. So the first thing I said was, well, please send me your contract template and let me look at it. And she did. And she actually, she and her husband were both college graduates and they were pretty business savvy. And it was perfectly respectable contract the way it was put together, but she indemnified herself against everything up to and including the death of the dog. Not my fault was the bottom line. And she had terms and conditions in there, including being able to ship dogs on airplanes in, extreme summer heat and extreme winter cold. And I saw those temperature ranges and I went, my God. And so I immediately went over to my vet, whom I have a, decades-long relationship with. And I said to her, and I had a regular appointment for Bammy, and I handed her the contract and I said, if this were your dog, would you sign up with this handler? And she got down to all the indemnification T's and C's. And she went, my God, absolutely not. And I said, thank you. And so I ripped it up. And I, emailed this gal and I said, no way, absolutely no way.
Yeah.
Excuse me, I have a snarky dog here. So at any rate, you really have to watch what's in the contract, because if you don't, it's a real gotcha.
So first of all, you have to have a contract. That's number one.
Right.
And if they don't have a contract, you can draft one and have them agree to it. And then if they do have a contract, you have to read every term. God, please. My office is full of people who just signed the contract because they so wanted the person to handle their dog or to care for their dog or to train their dog. And they didn't read the fine print like Connie did and find out that they were holding themselves harmless. Now, it's fine to hold yourself harmless, but you have to have a conversation and people have to understand what those terms mean. Now, Connie, being the brilliant person she is, would understand that. There are several people who I've dealt with in my office who really didn't understand, but didn't want to ask because they felt they would appear stupid to what it meant. And I'm telling everyone who's listening to this, when you're traveling with your pet, if you're flying with them, ask questions of the if someone is flying with them, ask questions of the person who's flying with them, how it's going to be done, what they're going to do to assure the safety of those pets. Do they give a note to the pilot so the pilot knows there's a living animal down there? It's not enough to tell the well, now you have to drop them off at air freight. So you don't even get to tell the person at the door, that the dogs are there. They go through. So I am, if I had a new middle name, it would be redundancy. I am such a redundant person for advising and informing, because I want to make sure everyone we know in that dog's life knows where they are, where they're going, what's going to happen to them, what's already happened to them. So Maggie has had several incidences where she didn't feel comfortable. She either bit someone or she wouldn't put her collar on or whatever. So you want to let people know about that, because you don't want someone to come up and say, oh my God, your dog bit me. Well, okay, so I advised you that if you bother Maggie, she might bite you, because that's her mechanism when she feels threatened. If you advise someone of that and they get bitten, that is almost always a determining factor on damages, because if you know and you still did what I told you not to do, that sort of, the judge looks at that and says like, okay, so the dog did bite you, it might have punctured your skin. However, if the owner told you several times and you admit the owner told you several times, don't do it, and you did it, then that's a mitigating circumstance for any sort of recovery. So it's always best when you're traveling with your dogs to make sure, and I'm maniacal about this, and I know that all of you on this call are maniacal about this. I am telling people to keep their distance. I'm making sure that my dogs are well in hand if somebody comes down the street with another dog or walks up to the, if you're dropping them off at an airline, or if you're at a rest stop and someone's walking their dog as well. I really am maniacal about making sure my dog isn't on a flexi, making sure my dog is in a safe place. I mean, before you take them out of the car to take them for a walk on the grass. See if there's a lot of poop left over, always a bad sign. But also if there's glass, or the new thing is that people are leaving different drug paraphernalia and gummies. The grass, they fall out of their pockets, whatever. And of course, you might not be taking the edibles. However, your dog might take an edible that they find in a park or at a parking lot or whatever, and you don't know. So you really do have to, if you're traveling with your pet, check where you're letting them walk before you walk there. So let's recap the things to put into place if you're traveling with your dog, if your dog is traveling without you, if your dog is going somewhere to a kennel or a groomer. All of these people need to know what it is you want done with your pets. So you need to have all of their contact information available to the person. I always like hard copies. It's just me because I'm old. However, if you text a sheet to someone so that they have them, that's okay if that's the way they want them, and maybe they can save them that way, and then it's right there and it's organized. If you're traveling by air, recognize that this is not a perfect science, and make sure that you alert everyone, the stewardesses, the pilots, that dog is down there, because they don't necessarily know. It's not a perfect system. If you're driving on the road, make sure that you have the dog secured in some way, because if someone opens the door, if you want to go in and pee and, it's 90 degrees outside, have a second set of keys, or in worst case scenario, leave the windows open and run really quick, but then someone could reach in. If your dog's in a crate, they're not going to reach in and take your dog. And, you can even leave your back open. I always like to lock my dogs in their crates. That's a different idea for people, whether or not they want to lock their dogs in a crate. I lock them in because I want to make sure that door is secure. I mean lock with a padlock, and everybody knows what the combination is. And I have the combination in my file, but you would have to be able to find that. And finally, what I really want everyone to know is to make sure that the directives you have for the care of your pets, if something happens to you, is easily found. So let me check in with you, Susan, on anything you want to add as we wrap up.
No, I'm just thinking of one time when I took my previous dog to a groomer and he escaped from her house, and how stressful that was. And if the dog had had some like something on him, they could have contacted me, but we did find the dog. It just was a very
Stressful time.
yeah, it was incredibly stressful. So I'm
You know,
appreciating what you're saying. But as you know, anytime a dog's taken to anywhere, any kind of dropping off, there's always that risk.
and we know that groomers don't want to keep collars on while they're grooming. However, often it's just a matter of a minute or two where they need to do the neck into shoulders so that they can take the collar off, do the neck into shoulders, put the collar. It's a simple ask. And because they don't do it, they don't do it. But if you ask, usually it'll be, oh, I could have had a V8. Maybe I should do this with everybody's dog. So it's thing to request, because it only takes a minute or two for a dog to jump off a table and run away. And as you said, if they have a collar on, if they have a microchip, that makes it easier for them to be returned. Connie, any last thoughts?
No, I think I've pretty well mentioned everything. But again, I cannot stress that if you are traveling by air, either with your dog or you've given the dog to a handler to ship, you have got to do everything 10 times more redundantly than you normally would.
Yes, again, my favorite word in my middle name, redundancy, because they're counting on us to make sure that if something happens, there's somebody there to take care of them. Sally? What are you doing?
Well, actually, I just took my neighbor's dog back that had escaped, a 120-pound Great Dane, and put him back in the yard. I called the neighbor and he said, well, I said, what should I do? He's in the yard. He goes, well, actually, I'm in the hospital. He goes, but can you take him onto the back deck and lock both of the gates on the back deck, because he will escape out of the yard again. And if you can put him on the back deck and lock both of the doors, then he'll go into the dog door and go back into the house. But if he's in the yard, he's going to escape again. And actually, I didn't realize that was the second escape of the day. But, and this poor gentleman has put up 2 different fences and the dog is still escaping. So, I just called, happened to know his number, which was fortunate. I didn't realize he's in the hospital, but, gave me clear instructions. And he said, if you can't do that, here's the code to the garage, and stick him in the garage.
Well, it's great that you were there. And these are the kind of things, there's a YouTube video that my husband sent me where this boxer climbed, I kid you not, a 9-foot chain link fence and jumped up and landed like a gazelle. Like most of my dogs, when they do stupid things like that, they fall, hit their chin because, their legs go out from, and they hit their chin and it hurts and maybe they'll never do it again. But this boxer was like a ballerina jumping across the stage and landing on his feet like a cat. And I sat there and went, that was a 9-foot chain link fence up and over. No problem. If you have a dog like that, A, you need to let people know who are going to be caring for your dog. And B, you have to rethink your fencing. So Great Danes are ingenious. They don't necessarily climb fences. However, if they can jump over them, which because they're such big dogs, they could jump over a 4 or 5 foot fence in like no problem. You really need to do one of 2 things. You either put an invisible fence on the inside so that when they get close to it, they get zapped. I know many people will say, oh, Deborah, you're so terrible. Well, it's much less painful than being hit by a car, I can assure you. And it doesn't keep dogs out, but it keeps your dog in. And I'm a firm believer in double fencing. So I always had a hard fence and the invisible fence. I kept my dogs in and I kept your dogs out. But you really need to make sure that you're aware of that. So if you're on the road and some nice hotel has a beautiful pet yard, which one of them did while I was away in northern North Carolina, beautiful exercise pen in the back of either a Red Roof or a Hilton or a Hyatt, beautiful. But the fence was only like 3.5, 4 foot high. I said, any dog who's a fence jumper is going to go sit this in a nanosecond. Mine, of course, doesn't even bother with a little baby gate that's leaning across the door. He'll just lay there until you move it. But if you have a dog you know is going to challenge a fence or challenge a gate, then you really have to let people know. So I'm so glad everybody was here for this wonderful program on traveling with your pets. It does take a little time to get ready and able to travel with them. Don't forget their food. I suggest also, as an aside, I always use bottled water when I'm traveling because you just never know what different waters are going to do. And who wants diarrhea on our trip? Nobody wants diarrhea. Bottled water will never create diarrhea. There are also medications you can get from your vet that'll help with that if you want to just feed them non-bottled water, because what kind of a privileged pet needs bottled water? Well, this dope does, because he just does. But in any event, I love you all. Kiss your babies for me. Kiss Miss Patsy and Mr. Casey. Kiss our wonderful, wonderful Catan for us, Maggie, and of course the Red girls whose pictures were shown all over the wedding because everyone was mesmerized that I only had one dog. And I said, no, I have 3, but 2 live in paradise and 1 lives in hell. And that's the one here. So until next Wednesday, I love you all. It's Deborah Hamilton, Hamilton Law Mediation, and of course this wonderful MAAP community. Don't forget to put your names and everything on your fridge. So you take care, and I love you all.